everybody.
Hey.
How you doing?
Good.
Sweet. How's conference going so far?
Great.
Good?
Yeah.
Learning a lot? Are you awake?
Yeah.
It's about that time in the afternoon. That's probably why they put me in the slot. Because I'm going to keep you awake. My name's Jen Kramer. I teach web design and development over at Harvard University in the Extension School. You might know me from lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning or Front End Masters, O'Reilly, Aquent, OS Training. I've been a bunch of places. And I just got back from vacation. I'm feeling really, really good. So this is where I was a week ago. This is Cape Breton Highlands National Park in Canada, up at the top of Nova Scotia. That's the beautiful, that's the picture that they show you when you look at all the marketing and so forth. The part they don't show you is this, right? Which it takes to get there. I had a couple of really beautiful days. I had some days that rained, but you could still see a whole bunch of great stuff, and I even saw a moose. So excited. Anyway, that was the fun part of the talk. Now we're on to a little bit about responsive design 2.0. So anybody have any idea what I'm talking about here with responsive design 2.0? Kind of, a little bit. Maybe you've started to hear a little bit about this kind of thing. This is the name that I've applied to it. I'm not sure there's actually a name for this technique, but we have a whole bunch of stuff that's just come out recently in CSS that has made our way of working responsive design. We're going to totally redo it here coming up in the next year or two. We're redoing everything we do on the front end, so might as well be this too, right? So this is basically what's involved here. So CSS Calc, anybody using that yet? A few of you. Custom properties, also known as variables in CSS. Some of you going, oh, wow, we have variables in CSS? Yeah, we do. It's really cool. And then either Flexbox or Grid. So everybody using that? Okay, good. And then sometimes SASS. Anybody using SASS? That gets the most votes. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of stuff to go through here for you. I'm not going to go through Flexbox and Grid. There was a Grid talk, I think earlier today, was it? There was a Grid talk. Flexbox is pretty standard at this point, but I will go through Calc and custom properties in some detail. So first of all, let's talk about Calc. Most excitement we've had with math, since grade school here. So what exactly is CSS Calc? So first of all, we can do math in CSS. Everybody excited? Go math. We're so glad to be sitting in an auditorium talking about math. Well, you can use this math with all kinds of things in CSS, including length and frequency, angle, time, number, integer. And it's also worth noting, this is how you set up addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So, big deal. It kind of works like math in SASS. It works like math in JavaScript, right? So that's the punchline, right? This is what it's going to look like. So you say something like width, and then you say calc, and then inside of parentheses you put in whatever you want it to calculate. Anyone know anything very cool just looking at that one line of code that you can say or comment on?
The units are different?
Yeah, the units are different, aren't they? Can we do that in SASS? SASS will just blow up. So this is one of the extremely cool things here with Calc. Okay, it's a big differentiator between Calc and SASS, the ability to mix your units like this. So if you're wondering about browser support, when I made this slide in March, we were at whatever that says, does that say 93%? Today it's 95.61%. Okay, that's pretty much universal, about as universal as we get. The problems are with the usual suspects, all right? So then we have a bunch of advantages for this kind of thing. Even if you are one of the people who have to use one of those browsers, which shall remain nameless, you can even write fallbacks like this, okay? So you just take advantage of CSS to write your fallbacks. So you can say, here's the fallback, and then on the next line, all you have to do is put in your calc there, and that'll more finely calculate whatever it is that you're trying to do. So you really have no excuse. You can just go on ahead and start doing this all together. Sometimes calc is a really great way to document the kind of math that you're doing in your CSS. Where did that weird number come from? Sometimes it's actually easier to explain with a calculation, right? And I have an example for that that'll show you here in just a second. Obviously, there's a whole lot of this stuff. There's more to read on CSS tricks. Feel free to take a look. So here's some examples of this. Everybody remember the good old days of floats? You'd put a box next to another box, and it added to 100%. They'd run into each other, and you put a little space in between, and then what? They'd wrap on top of each other. Right? Remember those good old days? Yeah. Now we can do this instead. So here, if I have a box that's 40% and a box that's 60%, it's really 60% minus that space in between, right? So instead of having to do all of that math and try to figure it out, now you just write it. Oh, so nice. Are you excited yet? Yeah, this is awesome. Here's another way of making math easier to understand. So where did we get 14.2857%? Right? So here now you can just write it as, those are the math problems. This is my grid layout. Here's my math problems. You take 100%, you divide it by my 7-column grid. I don't know why you're writing a 7-column grid system. It just produces really weird numbers. But anyway, take 100% divided by 7 and then multiply by how many boxes you want it to cover, right? There's your grid system, all written out with math. Some of you are starting to smile. This is good. Get excited, all right? A few little syntax quirks that you should know about with calc. It is very space sensitive. Okay, so if you're trying to say subtraction, make sure you put spaces all the way around the minus sign. Otherwise, it'll think, say, 50% negative 8 pixels. Right? Doesn't know what to do with that. It fails. But you can say something like 8 pixels plus negative 50%. That works. Okay? You don't have to have those white spaces around multiply and divide, but let's be consistent. I hate trying to remember exceptions to the rule. So if you just do spaces around all your operators all the time, you'll never have to worry about any of the problems. Sound good so far? Okay. You can combine this with SASS. So if you were using SASS variables, for example, you might want to pull one into a calculation here. This is the syntax that you use to do that. You may have seen this in other areas of SASS before, this hashtag with the little curly brackets around that, all right? So why would you use SASS math versus calc math? That's probably your next big question. SASS can't do math with different units, right? Calc and CSS can definitely do math with different units. So that's really the big advantage right there. Order of operations applies. Everyone remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally from 4th grade? Cool. I say this, and sometimes people look at me like I'm strange, but that order of operations still applies. So if you don't remember what order things are going, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And that is the order of operations. So, calc can be used anywhere to perform numeric calculations. Don't forget around your white space, around your operators. Mixing and matching your units is cool. You can use parentheses or nest your calc statements in order to do really complex math. It's well supported. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Anything else? Everybody good so far? Calc, you can use it. Yes, you have a question back there?
Yes, if your browser window changes, does the CSS kind of fix itself?
Yes. So if the browser window is changing, will the calculation recalculate itself and so forth? Yes, it will. And in fact, we're going to see some really cool stuff in action here before long. Okay? So that's part 1. Now we've got math. Part 2, custom properties. And there's a reason it's called custom properties and not called variables. Because these are variables, but it's CSS, so it's a little weird. Okay? Because CSS. All right, so what exactly are we talking about here? Kind of like variables, but weird quirks. So first of all, has everybody worked with variables in some context or another? Whatever your programming language, because like literally every programming language is like X equals something, right? And the syntax varies, but the concept is there, right?
Sure.
Little different in CSS. All right, so you're going to have to declare your variable value using CSS, which means that you have to have a declaration with the curly brackets, right? And then you put in your whatever your values are inside of that. I'll show you the syntax here in a minute. The values are going to inherit. Ooh, inheritance in the cascade, very much a thing in CSS, and it does apply to the properties as well. Also, variables can be used in JavaScript. Ooh, okay? And I've literally told you everything I know about that topic because I am not a JavaScript person, but most of you JavaScript people like go crazy when you hear this. Once again, here is the can I use. Our usual suspect friend on the left side of the chart are the problems, as they are always the problem children. I looked at it today, we're up to 91.11% support. That's pretty darn good, okay? So let's just take a look a little bit about how we go about doing this. So here's the simple example. So up on the top there, you have colon root. Anyone ever seen this selector before? Few of you? What does it mean?
It's HTML element.
It's the root of the document, right? It's actually not the HTML element, it's the whole root of the document. Why wouldn't we just say HTML?
Sometimes the document root and the web root are not the same thing.
Exactly.
Say AAA.
That's right. Sometimes they're not the same thing, right? The document root and the HTML tag may not be the same thing, which might be why you might use this one. What's another reason? Hint, cascade. This is well, perhaps. This is a pseudo class, right? Greater degree of specificity to it than a plain HTML element. True? Oh, you guys know about this, right? Pseudo classes? Yeah, okay, all right. So then here inside of that root tag, we can go ahead and we can declare our variables, all right? So you call them whatever you want. There's our old friend primary color. I think it's required by law in every CSS talk, right? So primary color, there it is. We're gonna call it blue or whatever, any of the other values. Gap, here's another value for gap, okay? So it's a double dash, followed by whatever it is you want to call it, your name, and then give it a value. And then when you call that, you're just going to simply put in your selector there. You're going to put in your whatever, in this case, let's say it's background color. We put in var, and then in parentheses around it, double dash, and the name of your variable that you're calling. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right.
Jen,
Yes?
this is plain old ordinary CSS?
Plain old ordinary CSS. Nothing compiled, nothing added.
Okay, thanks.
Your basic CSS. Okay. And then down here at the bottom in the H1, I showed you an example of combining calc with CSS variables. So here we have our value for gap, and we're multiplying it by 5 pixels. I don't know why. We just are. Everybody good on that? Yes?
Does the calculation require a unit? A unit? Can I just multiply by 5 in that case?
You probably could. Sure. You probably could take the value of gap and just multiply it by 5. In this case, I'm multiplying it by 5 pixels, which is different. Right? And the calc is smart enough to be able to do that math. It's 5 pixels rather than just a factor of 5. Those are two actually very different things. Okay, so this root thing means that where you've declared these variables, these are essentially they're global variables, right? These are available to you anywhere in the document, right? And here's some examples of things that you could put into variables or whatever you want to call them and so forth. All kinds of, any legit CSS value you could put here into a variable. It's worth noting that CSS is not going to check to make sure that your property and your value should go together. So if you call for a background color of 1.75 rem, CSS is good with that. Okay? So be careful of that. And it doesn't have to be root that's declared here, right? Here I'm declaring root because this is giving me global access to these variables. Remember that I could declare my variable within a smaller portion of my document, right? So if I declared it in my class of wrapper, or I declare it for paragraphs only, yeah? It's kind of like variable scoping that happens there. Make sense? Okay. So a little bit of differences between CSS variables and SASS variables. Here's some SASS. This side is the code that you would have actually on the SASS side of things. After you compile it, this is what you get. Everybody good with that? Pretty straightforward. Your CSS is going to look like this instead. So we declare our value of our color at the top. We call it later on, right? So you could call a color, you could call it as part of a border value here. So, yes?
Is there a specificity hierarchy between root and a smaller piece, snippet of, declaration?
I'm so glad you asked. They have inheritance, but it's weirder than you think. So let's take a look at these kind of things. And here we go. So y'all can see that? You can see that? You can read the code? Okay, so on the left side here, in the HTML, I have a really simple HTML example here, right? An H1, a paragraph, and then I have an article with a paragraph inside of it. Everybody good on the HTML? Okay. And then on the CSS side here, I've declared a color red, and then inside of my article, I've said that my text color will be red. Shockingly, everything here turns red, right? All right, if I take the color here from my article and I put it in my paragraph, right? Now my paragraph text is red. This is like first day CSS stuff, yeah? Everybody good so far? Okay, what happens if I have color red here, and then down here I redeclare color, and I'm going to say a different color. Let's say I type in blue here. What's going to happen? Other than I'm a really horrible programmer. What's going to happen? How many say that the...
No, because you haven't put in an element.
I haven't put in the element. What do you mean by that?
Well, you're putting it, well, I don't know SAS, but I mean, there's nothing, that color declaration doesn't refer to any element, so P is a greater specificity, so.
Okay, so you're saying, all right, well, if I type in the word blue here, this is going to show you the answer. So assume that blue is coming here, okay? So what color is my article? Is it going to be red or blue? How many say red?
Red.
How many say blue? Okay?
Oh, because it's a variable.
More of you are saying that it's blue. All right, and then for the paragraph, how many of you are saying it's red? How many are saying it's blue? More of you are there on the blue. Okay, so we'll put in blue. Okay? So we have sort of a combination of two things that are going on here, right? So first of all, the article declared itself as red, right? So everything inside of that was red, but in actually the paragraph declaration that's later takes greater specificity, right? And it becomes blue, overriding the red that was there before. Everybody okay so far? Okay, so let's look at the same example again. Everything is exactly the same, but now I'm going to do this with CSS. Okay? The CSS variables. So same HTML, same example here. So we'll start off just like I had before. The article was red. We'll put it in the paragraphs. Now the paragraphs are red. Okay? So I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did before here. And so here, I have my root with the color of red. What I'm going to do this time, because I have to be inside of some kind of declaration in order to declare my variable, right? So what I'm going to do this time is here inside of article, I'm going to redeclare my color of blue. Okay, when I finish typing it, the color will be blue. Okay? So I'm taking bets again. How many of you say that the paragraph text is going to wind up being red? Anybody? Okay, some of you say red. How many say blue? Okay, a few more of you say blue. Okay. So if I place this color declaration right here inside of article, everything is now blue. Why is that?
Because of the cascade.
Because I misunderstood what article was.
Because what?
I misunderstood what article was.
Oh, you misunderstood what article was. Okay, yes?
It's lower in the cascade.
Yeah, so we have the root, right? Then we have the article, then inside of that we have the paragraphs. Okay, so now I've basically overridden my, my declaration out at root of red. I've redefined it now as blue. What if I pull this color blue into paragraph? What's going to happen there?
All the paragraphs.
Paragraphs are all blue? Okay. Okay? Cool, you get a sense of the whole scoping thing that's going on?
Yeah.
All right? So, so that's a little bit about that. And that's a really fun thing to leverage, by the way. And I'm going to show you more examples of that here as we go through. Okay, so you might be wondering when you should use SASS and when you should use custom properties. Am I suggesting you throw away all of that wonderful sassy goodness? We now have math in CSS. We have variables in CSS. Is it time to throw out SASS? Why not?
I11.
IE11. IE11 means we can't do it. It is true. What else? What are we missing?
Might be the speed that it has to process that. Or, but
It's actually CSS calc and variables, very limited impact on performance. Not really much of a thing at all. You're far better spent your time reducing image size and getting your JavaScript under control. Okay? What about extends? What about mix-ins? What about nesting? We still don't have any of that good stuff in CSS, right? So there's still a lot of reasons to use SASS. So given that, now we have variables in SASS, we have variables in CSS. We have math in SASS, we have math in CSS. So when should we use each of those? What I'm suggesting here for this is that use your SASS global variables for things that are never going to change. Okay? Colors, font families, stuff like that. That's never going to change in your code, most likely, right? You're not going to change that across your devices. So set those up as big global SASS variables. And then custom properties are going to be for values that are going to change in media queries. Believe it or not, we can now change the values of these variables inside of media queries. And this is what makes this so incredibly cool. And your heads will be exploding momentarily. Okay? So, things that are going to change in those media queries like font size, margin padding, width, flex basis properties, all that good stuff, that's the stuff that you're going to want to use as CSS variables. And then outside the media query, we're going to establish our logic for layout, changing the values of the custom properties inside of the media query. So instead of I hate using traditional in an industry so young, but instead of traditional responsive design, right? You know how this has gone. You write a whole bunch of stuff. That's our mobile layout, right? Then you go to the media query and you copy down the style you just had, right? And you recode everything to look different at the tablet, and then you copy it again. And you recode everything to look different at desktop. And how many times do you repeat yourself in that process? Yeah? Now what I'm suggesting is all we need to do is put all that logic for that layout outside in the mobile area of our CSS. And in the media queries, what goes there? All we're going to do is change the values of our variables. Ooh, pretty, huh? Very efficient. So a little bit about some of this and how this would work. I have another code pen here for you. Okay, so here's an example. This is super simple HTML on this side, H1, couple paragraphs, one with a class of smaller, all right? Over on the right side, here's your CSS. Check out what happens here. So we have a text size of normal, all right? When we want to go bigger, now I'm using calc to take that normal variable and scale it a little bit bigger, yeah? When I want to go smaller, I can take that normal value and scale it to go a little smaller. Make sense? And then here I can, just call in whatever it is I'm going to use. So here I am in the mobile version of this. We're going to use normal, bigger, and smaller, where you'd expect them to be, right? Then in the media query, check that out. Change one thing, changing my value of my text size to normal. That's all I need to do, right? This is the moment where I just let you read for a minute. There's smoke coming out of your ears. See how that worked? See how that worked? So by that one text size of normal, and then changing its value in the media query, I've now set up a whole type scale. So some of you might be starting to think about things like type scaling. Here it is. This is basically the way you would go about doing it. Oh, yeah. I heard that. All right? You guys good? Do you want to look at this a little longer? Yeah? You good? Are you happy? Are you like getting really excited?
Can you squish it and show us?
Can I squish it and show you? Well, let me make it just can I make it a smidge smaller? There. Does that help? Can you still read it?
I think she wanted.
Can you
He
like
wants to see the
squish your
result,
window
I think.
and show us it changing?
Oh, that part. That thing! Sure. Let's see. Full page view. Okay. Ooh. Did it change?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. There we go. Round in there. Nice, huh? Okay. Everybody happy? Yay, it gets better. Okay, it's like a fireworks show, we start slow and then we scale up. All right. Okay, so for those of you who are wondering about JavaScript, I have an article here that talks about how you can use JavaScript and work with CSS variables to make these changes. Feel free to take a look. Don't ask me any questions. I can't answer them. All right, so then we're on to the really exciting part, which is combining these variables with calc and flexbox. I have an example for you. So if you'd like to follow along at home, go ahead and open up your laptops. You don't need anything but a browser. And go to bit.ly/rwd2019. And you can follow right on along. I'll give you just a second here. All right? Because we're going to write some code to make this happen. All right. Okay, so in this example that I'm going to show you now, I have already built a 4-column grid system, okay? And it's designed with Martha Stewart colors for a reason, because I want you to be able to tell what's 1 column wide and what's 2 columns wide and what's 3 columns wide. So the colors are hideous. That is by design. Those are my super fine design skills at work right there. All right, so we've got 4, we've got 2, we've got a 1 and a 3, we've got a whole column, and then we've got a 1, 2, 1. Everybody good with that?
A whole column or a whole row?
Sorry, whole row.
Okay.
Whole row. And if we start to scrunch that down, woo, there's the breakpoint, right? So we go 2 and 2. There's our layout. Super nice, right? And then when we go down to mobile, which I can't scrunch my browser any further for whatever reason, obviously they're all going to stack on top of each other, right? So that's the way it looks. We're going to change absolutely nothing about the way this thing looks, but we're going to totally refactor it in order to use this new responsive design 2.0 code, all right? So I'm going to go back to my editor here, and let's take a look at what we have going on. So for those of you keeping score at home, down on the bottom, I've got some basic design stuff. You can look at that. It's colors and things. The real working part of the grid system is here at the top. So we have a row. Our row class is going to go around each one of these sets of boxes. Okay, so say in row 1 here, I have four article boxes all next to each other. And so this is where we declare our display flexed and our flex flow of row wrap and justify content of space between. Which one is space between? Does anyone remember space between?
It's where it pushes the elements out, leaves gaps in between.
Yeah, so it's going to take everything, push it all the way to the side, the first box and the last box, right? And then any extra space, it's going to distribute evenly in between the boxes. Make sense? Okay, that's that one in Flexbox. And then if you read the code in great detail, you'll understand what all these classes are doing. But basically, when you work in with Flexbox on this kind of thing, you don't use width, right? You use flex basis. Does everybody know this? Because I say this in all these talks and people are like shocked by this. There's no width property in Flexbox. That is the flex in Flexbox. It's the flex basis property, people, all right? So I've written this as flex, 0, 0. Remember the first one's grow, the grow, second one's shrink, and then the third one's the basis property. And the basis property says, in this case, say for example, that's a terrible example, let's see, 48%. Make it that box 48%. Kinda, right? It's Flexbox. That 48% might be 53%, it might be 12%, depending on how small you're scrunching down the screen and what else you have going on, right? But get it close to 48%. When you use width instead and you say 48%, is it ever 47.9%? No. Is it ever 48.1%? No, it is 48% all the time, and that is why you should not use width in Flexbox. Let your boxes flex, people. Okay? Do it with flex basis. So that's what we got going on here. A whole bunch of different flex basis properties for these things are changing across the media queries. We've got some ordering going on with some ordering classes. Everybody good so far? Pretty simple example. So now I'm going to rewrite this using custom properties in Calc and some other cool stuff. So I'm going to start here with row. And inside of row, I'm going to establish a variable. I'm going to call it columns 4. Okay? So I didn't put this in a root class. This has to do with my layout. My layout and Flexbox will always be based on a row. So I'm going to establish this variable on my row class. And I've just said this is a 4-column grid system. That's basically what that variable is saying. Okay? Then the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a very cool selector called class star equals quote call hyphen. Anyone know this trick? Anyone know this selector? Anyone recognize it?
Yeah, select anything starting with call.
Starting with
Contain.
Yeah?
Start with selector.
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually this one, star equals, is anywhere in the string. Okay? So the square brackets are what? Attribute selector. So I'm looking at the class attribute and I'm saying here, somewhere in the string, look for COL hyphen. It happens to be that all of my layouts start COL hyphen, right? So now I can grab all of those classes with one big, huge declaration, just like this. Very efficient way to code that. And then inside of that, I'm going to set up something else here, right? Because what I want to do is set up a width. And I'm going to call this 4 as well. So basically what I'm saying here to start with is I'm going to have a 4-column grid system, And all of my classes outside the media query, how big are they?
4 columns.
They're 4 columns wide, right? Make sense? Okay, 4 column grid system, outside the media query, when we're talking about mobile layout, everything's gonna be 4 columns wide, right? So how wide is that column going to be?
1/4.
1/4? Not
Well,
quite,
no, because there's a gap in between.
right? Outside the media query, are all the boxes stacked on top of each other? How wide are all the boxes? 100%, right? So basically I need to do like a 4 divided by 4 kind of thing going on here, right? Okay, so then I'm going to do some math, and I'm going to call this my initial basis. And I'm going to say calc var width and then divide that by var columns. Make sense? Divide your width by your columns. What is that going to give me here?
1.
1. Is that a helpful number?
No.
What do I need to do now? What becomes a helpful number?
100%.
100%. So what should I do here to make this 100%?
Multiply.
Multiply by
100%.
100%. I know, it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You didn't realize you're going to have to do all this thinking. Okay, multiply by 100%. There we go. Or actually 1%, right? Technically 1%.
1%.
100%.
Oh, yes, right, 100%. I was looking at the wrong line. 100%. There we go. All right? So, if I wind up with 4 boxes, okay? What value is my width? What value would my width variable be? If I have 4 boxes going across, what is my value of width? 1.
That's your.
1. Each one of those is going to be 1 column wide, right? 1. If I have a 2 and a 2, what's my value for width? 2. If I have 1 column that's going across 3, what is my value of width? 3. Okay? So what I'm going to do down here is I can go ahead and set up instead here width of 2. Here I'll set up a width of 4. And then down here in the desktops, we'll set up a width of 1. Two. And 3. Why haven't I talked about column 4? Column 4 isn't actually changing anywhere, right? Column 4 is going to be the same always, basically. It's going to have a width of 4. It's really not changing anywhere along the way here. It's always going to be 100%. So far, so good?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why was it times 100 instead of 100 divided by that?
Why is it times 100% instead of divided by 100%?
No, 100 divided by that calculation.
Divided by that calculation? Well, let's see. So if I had a width of, let's say 2, 2 divided by 4 would be 50, or 0.5.
Yep.
So you're saying 100 divided by 0.5?
Or 100 divided by... Never mind, got it.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. Math is hard. Okay. So, if we take a quick peek at what's going on down here, okay, Here's what's going on here. These things are just stacked on top of each other right now, okay? Because I've done all these calculations, but I haven't actually said what I want to do yet. So my flex hyphen basis is going to wind up being, right now, just var initial basis. Okay, so there we go. Now everything's all stacked on top of each other. See that? Okay, and let's see, if I save this, I can switch this, whoops, not this one. Change view. Okay, so far, it's doing kind of the thing that we had said it was going to do, right? But somebody pointed out we're missing all the padding.
Or the padding seems to kind of break in odd places.
The padding seems to break in odd places?
Well, you were moving it, and here and there you see a little slice of white, but it sometimes is there and sometimes isn't, or sometimes disappears.
Yeah, there's
You're
sort
getting
of,
a highly variable output.
Yep.
It's not necessarily very desirable.
at the moment. Okay, we're not done. Okay, but that's the basic part of this in a nutshell, right? Everybody see how we've really reduced the amount of code that we have here to something pretty basic, right? I can now set this up as a 12-column grid system, just like that, right? Change my number of columns to 12, set up a few more classes, and I'm done. Yeah? That's pretty cool. All right, so here's the next part. How do we calculate the gap? Okay? So we need to calculate that gap as well. So I'm going to put in here a variable called gap. And we're going to calculate something. What are we going to calculate? So let's think about this. If I have 4 boxes in my row, how many gaps do I have? 3. If I have 2 boxes in my row, how many gaps do I have? 1. If I have 1 box in my row, how many gaps do I have? 0. Anyone detecting a pattern here? Okay, so we need to do some kind of math here. And the way I set this up was this way. I said variable of width. You could do it -1. I did it this way, which also works. Oops, wait a minute. I always have to remember I'm looking at the right line. My apologies. Columns. Like I said, I just got back from vacation. Bar. Width. And then multiply all of that, because I don't only give you a number like 4 minus 3, right, is 1. Then you actually turn it into something useful. So I've made it 1%. Let me put in my space.
Order of boxes wrong.
Yes. Okay, so I've got this here. This was a nested one. It's very easy to miss all these little details. Thank you for that. Okay, so does that make sense? Number of columns minus the number of boxes we actually have will give us a number. And then you can multiply that by 1%. That'll give you a percent of how much room we have to play with, right? And because we're using justify content, it's going to divide that up evenly in between our boxes. Does that make sense? Sort of.
So does that mean if you used a different justify rule?
Yes.
You would have a different calculation?
You would definitely have a different result. Yeah, you might have to change this around. So now what does my flex basis become? Anybody? Yeah?
Instead of just the initial basis.
Correct. So we need to include that, right? So we're going to say var of initial basis minus var of gap. Yeah? Does that make sense? Obviously, you could write that a little bit more efficiently, but I'm not sure anyone would understand what you were talking about. That's why I have it written that way. Okay? And anyone wondering about like default values for these variables? Anyone bothered by that? Like what happens if width isn't declared or columns isn't declared or whatever? Anybody worried by that? So that is possible. You can simply put out like a column and a number like this, or comma number. That is how you would set a default value. 4. So you could go through and you could fill all of these in. But that is the syntax for a default value, if it's not already declared. All right? And so now, with that in place, hey, look at that. The spaces are back. Yeah? And if I save that, I hear a lot of whispering. If you have questions, you should ask. Okay? So there we go.
Is there a way that you could scale gap? In other words, as your columns are getting smaller,
Yep.
you don't necessarily want that exact same gap as you would if it's each one is 3 inches wide.
Right. You just want them to line up though, right?
You still want them to line up, but you might want them to flex as well.
Yep. So this is just one suggestion for how to do the math. You could obviously come up with a totally different methodology. Just as somebody said, if I didn't use justify around, you would probably have to do your calculations a bit differently here.
Okay.
That had to factor in the gap. But this is just one way of doing it. And what happened here was I read an article about somebody who had calculated the basis there. And guess what they did for the borders? Guess what they did for the gaps? They put in borders, the white borders in between the boxes, and it looked like there were gaps. I was like, really? You're cheating. So then I went through and I wrote the math here to calculate a gap as well. All right? So that's what it's all about. What do you think? This is the future of our responsive design. And we're going to set up things like this. We're going to wind up now seeing the media queries. All we're doing is just changing values. See how clean that is? Are you excited?
Yes.
A hush fell over the room. I have here a reading list for you. A little light reading. If you look at my CodePen account, which is codepen.io/gen4web, gen number 4 web, and then take a look at my blog. This is posted there. So a little bit of reading about calc, custom properties, grid, flexbox, grid systems, games, all kinds of good stuff. Okay, and just a couple slides to put the whole thing together here, and we'll be done. All right. So those are the resources that I mentioned. Those are available. And I want to do a mention of a shameless commerce. Anybody front-end masters subscribers? Okay, front-end masters is one of those video places you can subscribe to for some amount per month. And if you subscribe there, you can come and watch my live workshop on Responsive Design 2.0, as well as some advanced grid stuff I'm going to be doing as a course on August 15th. It will be a live stream between 9:30 and 5:30 if you want to watch it and follow along. And they will otherwise change this into a course that you can watch offline later on. So that is a thing if you are interested. The details will follow there. And the slides are posted at SlideShare. If you have questions, I would be delighted to answer them. So thank you very much. Thanks. Questions?
Would you use calc also in conjunction with CSS grid?
Sure. Yeah, so if your grid layout is changing, right, you're gonna change whatever, the widths of your row calculations, however many boxes you're gonna have, you're gonna change sizes and all that, yeah.
I was wondering if the syntax is compatible.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely it is. Other questions? All right, well, that's pretty much it. See you guys later. Thanks.